Good evening and welcome to the Friday edition of Live at Grange. This is the last event of the Teagasc Virtual Beef Week, supported by FBD Trust. Tonight we're going to finish looking at the grand challenges facing the beef sector. We've got climate change, biodiversity, water quality, animal welfare, eating meat is bad for you. Sometimes the list seems endless. And of course the biggest challenge of all is the low incomes faced by beef farmers. But look, it's not without hope. We have seen all week how technology and best practice can contribute to profitable and sustainable beef enterprises. We've got a very strong panel here tonight to discuss these grand challenges. We've got the Minister for Agriculture, the Vice President of the European Parliament, the President of the IFA and the Director of Teagasc. And I'm now going to hand over to our host for the evening, Professor Teagasc from UCC, to chair the discussion.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final edition of Live at Grange. We're delighted to have you this evening. Our panel this evening is going to address the challenges facing the beef sector, and it's very kindly sponsored by FBD Trust. We're coming to the end of our virtual beef week, and we hope you've enjoyed all of the events that have been put on by Teagasc. I hope you found it informative and stimulating. I know that you have received a lot of technical information, and this evening we're going to look at some of the big issues facing the future of the beef sector. We're joined by a very high-powered panel this evening. Here in studio, we're joined by Professor Jerry Boyle, Director of Teagasc, and Tim Cullinan, President of the IFA. I was also fortunate enough earlier to meet with the newly appointed Minister for Agriculture, Minister Barry Cowan, and also by video link to Brussels to meet MEP and First Vice President of the European Parliament, Mairead McGuinness. So we had a chance to discuss a number of important issues facing the future of the beef sector, which we'll continue this evening with our panel. We are coming to you live, so if you had questions you would like me to put to the panel members, please send them to us by text message to 51444. So before I go to our panel this evening, first of all, we're going to hear from some farmers around the country. We've prepared a number of videos to hear from farmers themselves what the real issues on the ground are. We're going to start now by going to Geraldine Power in County Waterford and down to the real capital in Cork, Sean Kelleher, and we're going to hear from those farmers now by video.
I'm Geraldine Power. I live here in Kilbegkill, County Waterford. I took over this farm in 2001. I'm running, it's a farm of over 300 acres, 100 which are rented at the moment, and I'm farming 200 myself. I was suckling up to 85 cows up to 2016 and finishing all runners, and I went back to store beef since then, and I'm finishing all cattle. I also grow 30 acres of winter barley, which I used to keep and crimp myself and feed to the cattle here. But last summer I just became completely disillusioned after the winter before with winter finishing. I just couldn't, I suppose the word stomach it is for this winter. So to make sure I didn't do it, I sold my corn into the mill, and I kept no finishers last winter. I finished no cattle, and I just kept some stores for the summer here. In my opinion, the Irish government have begun to help us. Last year we had the beam scheme which was delivered to us. It was 100 million. Unfortunately, some people didn't take it up with the sanctions that were imposed on it. This year we have the €50 million scheme coming in. I would like to see that being delivered for all beef finishers, regardless of what time of the year they finished it, with very little sanctions that will help us all avail of it. At EU level, again, unfortunately farm payments are part of our life and they must stay with us, and with the new CAP reforms coming up, all effort must be put in to secure the best deal for us Irish farmers here who are doing our best to produce good Irish beef, and we want to be rewarded for it.
My name is Sean Kelleher. I'm from Newcastle, Bandon, County Cork. I'm farming about 65 hectares, finishing, buying all stores and finishing nearly all Angus cattle now. I'm fragmented enough holdings. I've 3 holdings and renting another bit of ground. I'm a member of the Bandon Beef Discussion Group. We're up and running since 2008. So we meet, I suppose, 10 months a year, and we go away on trips and things. So it is great to go out and meet other farmers and go to their farms and learn stuff from them. I think the Irish government and the EU will have to, unfortunately, keep the financial support going. It is a pity the Irish beef sector can't stand on its own 2 feet, but things have been bad now the last number of years. Last year there's a beam scheme was there, which was a great help in a very difficult year. So this year I think there is more money coming for some scheme like it, so we are not sure yet what way that will be divided out. And they had a KT scheme as well a number of years ago. I thought that was very good because it brought farmers out to group meetings, and sure, look, every day you come out you'll surely learn something or pick up something and take it home to your own farm. And now we're hearing of this new rep scheme that's coming out, and that should hopefully be a good help as well to farmers.
We heard from Geraldine and Sean about the real challenges facing beef farmers in Ireland and how important the direct payments and support schemes coming from government are to their future and their livelihoods. I had the opportunity earlier to discuss this with Minister Cowan. I asked him about his plans under the new government and the future of these schemes. I started off by putting the question to him, how important is the beef sector to the future of rural Ireland? And we'll hear now from the Minister.
First of all, thanks to you for having me. Delighted to take part in this event, and I appreciate it's a very important event in your own throughout the year. And as you rightly say, the industry has been challenged in recent years, and it's imperative that everybody works together to the best of their ability in order to ensure that it can rise to the new challenges it has. And we've a role to play in that too, and we acknowledge, as you say, the role it has in rural Ireland. It is a huge economic driver in rural Ireland. It's in the heart of every community. It's in every parish. 2019 alone saw €2 billion worth of sales within the farm gate, 2.3 billion of exports. At least half Irish farms, beef predominantly, and plays a part in the rest of them in a lot of cases. I know from your own research, I believe the multipliers in the region of 2.5. So for every euro spent, 2.5 euros is generated. All that money is spent in the local economy. So what's raised locally is spent locally, and that has to be a huge contributor and remains a huge contributor, as it always was, to that local economy that I mentioned. So it's in our interest to sustain it, to enhance it, and to ensure that it continues to thrive, that it continues to have the potential to thrive, that it continues evolving, improving, and ensuring that the production systems meet with the consumer sentiment that's out there, meet with the environmental sustainability that's expected within the sector nowadays. So, all told, it is a fantastic industry. Recent years we've seen improvements in relation to knowledge transfer, in relation to innovation, genomics, all contributing to an improved economic and environmental efficiency program, which enhances our product and which leaves our product competitive and at the forefront of international markets. We're shipping it further than ever, maintaining our own markets here in Europe, looking at new markets outside the main marketplace where we were previously. The last 5 years, been into Japan, we've been into USA, and in China. In relation to China, it's been a long time getting there, but the first Western European EU member state to gain into that market in 2008.
Thanks, Minister. I think you've outlined there very clearly the enormous economic contribution that the beef sector is making, but as well as that, the environmental role it plays in rural Ireland. But I suppose looking ahead, what do you feel yourself are the key challenges facing the sector as we go forward?
Look, there are many key challenges linked to what I said in the first answer, I suppose. But there are, in many cases, low margins. It's a long supply chain. There's a dependence on exports as much as we cherish them, particularly in the UK market. So they're obviously very dependent on basic farm payments, low incomes, in many cases supplemented by off-farm income. But I think really now we're faced with changing and challenging expectations from consumers, in the whole area of sustainability, as I said earlier, the whole area of there being alternative protein sources for many consumers nowadays, and the expectations that they have in relation to environmental ambition, in relation to animal welfare. We also have the present challenge that we're in the process of dealing with in relation to the COVID crisis and the market disturbance that has generated. And as I said earlier, the whole fear and worry and concern in relation to Brexit is back on the table. We've seen slow pace of movement, of development in relation to the trade deal between the EU and the UK. That's worrying. To that end, I know since I came into my position in the last week or so, we've been very anxious and have met with the EU Commissioner Hogan. We've met with the EU, he being the Trade Commissioner, of course, and having a pivotal role in those negotiations along with Barnier. And we've met with the Agricultural Commissioner this morning, impressing upon them the key demands that we have in relation to such a trade deal being successful. We can't afford a situation whereby we have a quota system and a tariff system that could be to the detriment of the industry, of the agriculture sector and fisheries indeed, and food in the whole. So, we also met with the with the Northern Ireland Minister in Agriculture, Mr. Poots. Yesterday then we spoke with Secretary of State, Mr. Eustace in the UK, again impressing upon them the real key need and requirement for a deal. We worked very closely with our EU partners to ensure that there was a Northern Ireland protocol. We worked closely with our UK partners to ensure that our unique geographic position was recognised in that agreement. And now need to build on that and ensure that land bridges are respected, to ensure that the EU commits to infrastructure expenditure and capital development on the ports to ensure easy passage. And also in the event of a no deal, in the event of a deal, that our own officials work hand in glove with EU officials, with UK officials, ensuring that the Irish farming fraternity, ensuring that the beef industry within that fraternity is protected and all eventualities are catered for. But obviously our main focus remains our commitment to an EU-UK trade deal and using all the leverage we have available to us to ensure that that's the outcome and that's the most positive outcome that we can expect in relation to those issues.
When I think of the farmers tuning in tonight to listen to us, I suppose farm incomes are their top priority and that's what's on their mind. The Teagasc National Farm Survey results were released last week and they've shown again that the beef sector is really lagging behind the dairy sector. Do you have policy measures in mind yourself in terms of tackling the low income situation in beef? What are your policy priorities around that?
Yeah, of course. Well, look, our first commitment has to be to maintain the basic income supports, to ensure that they are maintained, to ensure that the general schemes under CAP Pillar 1 and 2 fundings are maintained, that they're enhanced, that the conditionality is not one that is restrictive or overbearing, that it is ones that, as I said earlier, can enhance our products, but can encourage those to provide those products to move in a direction that benefits us all. Our dual aim of economic and environmental efficiency has been pursued by other means before I came into this position, with the Beef Data and Genomics Programme, 300 million over a period of 6 years, which has proved very successful and has allowed the expertise and the scientific information being imparted from bodies such as your own to those at the coalface, those that are now producing better quality, better product, and more environmentally and economically efficient product. And that's, we want to continue along that path. At the BEAM scheme in recent times to help and assist with difficulties in the marketplace. If the beef, I get lost in some of these acronyms sometimes. If the beef's suckler scheme, you've got the beef environmental efficiency pilot scheme as well. So look, those additionality over the course of any given program are always necessary to respond, especially to market influences and market disturbances. And in the next week or 10 days, I would hope to finalise the beef scheme, 50 million scheme to help and assist who've been affected by COVID earlier in the year. And that'll be a sharp, simple, easy scheme directed at finishers, no conditionality because it's our own funding this time as compared to the last one. And it's important that that's in place within the next week, applications being made and payments in October, whenever it might be. But that's our commitment, that's our aim. We want to honour that, and we do that in the next week.
So, Minister, thanks very much. You've been very generous with your time so far, but I suppose just before we wrap up, do you have any key messages for the farmers tuning in tonight?
So, if we have greater transparency, goodwill on all sides, stakeholders working together, us leading from the front, improving opportunities, improving trade deals, well, then I think everybody gets value, everybody wins on the supply chain, and the country is the better for it, and our economy is the better for it, and then many other areas and aspects of our economy can be improved with the beef sector and the agriculture sector playing its part in ensuring that that is the case. And that's what good governance is all about, I would have thought.
Minister Cowan, thank you so much for your time. I want to wish you the very best of luck in your new role.
Thanks, Steve.
And we look forward to hearing from you again in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, take care.
There's no doubt that Minister Cowan has come into his portfolio at a really busy time. The challenges of climate change, Brexit, a new CAP deal, notwithstanding the fallout from COVID, there's so much going on impacting on the beef sector. So what we're going to do now is we're going to explore some of those issues with the panel here in studio. So Jerry, I might go to you first, and in particular I'd like to pick up on a quote from Geraldine Parr, which was, "The Irish beef sector, it just can't stand on its own 2 feet." Is that an assessment you'd agree with, Jerry?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's been accepted for a long time now that the sector needs support in the form of direct payments, and that includes primarily, of course, the basic payment scheme. And it's recognised that a sector like beef suffers from several competitiveness challenges that justify public expenditure. And I think that justification is being amplified with the whole discussion around sustainability. So I think that argument is absolutely accepted. But at the same time, the Minister pointed out on the 2 farmers in the earlier videos that beef, for as long as I can remember, has really laboured under a very low margin problem. So notwithstanding the level of public support from the marketplace has been challenging for very many beef producers. And you referred to in your discussion with the Minister the evidence from the Teagasc National Farm Survey. It's very clear that the average farmer simply couldn't generate sufficient income from the market or indeed from the public support in the form of direct payments without having an alternative source of income. So very many farm households, beef farm households in particular, are dependent on off-farm income. So the low income margin problem in beef continues to be the critical problem in the sector. And from year to year it can worsen because of fluctuation. Last year been a very good example in market prices. And I guess that's where Teagasc comes in. Our primary role is to support the farmer in his or her actions inside the farm gate. How can they improve their level of living? But we recognise on its own that is not sufficient. I mean, it's an extraordinary figure, but over 60% of our farmers, based on the Teagasc National Farm Survey, do not generate a positive margin from the marketplace in the production of beef. And that, to me, is the challenge that just has to be tackled.
So if they're not generating the positive margin from the marketplace, it's all riding on the schemes then and the supports that are coming from government. And Tim, I suppose I want to put to you and what you just heard from the Minister there. Do you think that the new government will do enough? Is there anything in the new programme for government to give some hope to beef farmers?
I suppose, first of all, in the new programme for government, I would be concerned there's a lot in it. It's very aspirational, and there's very little figures in there. But I suppose I think Geraldine epitomises where beef farmers are at. It's a sad state of affairs when you have a lady there with 300 acres and she had a suckler herd and she couldn't continue with that. Like, that is very worrying. So that is the trend that is evolving around the country, and we have to address that problem. That situation cannot be allowed to continue. So we've seen over the last year, particularly on the finisher side, like, we had to go to Brussels and get a beam scheme of 100 million euros to keep beef farmers in business last year. And it was a support, obviously, because of what the concerns around Brexit. But here we are again this year. My first job as president of IFA was to go back, and we had to negotiate a new scheme, support because of COVID, of 50 million again for the beef sector. And the worrying thing here now is the basic payment is not even enough to keep beef farmers in business. And this is a very concerning time now. Obviously, this is the year that the budget will be decided for the next 7 years again. So I think the new government has a lot to do. The Minister has a lot to do, and the Taoiseach has a lot to do. There's a critical meeting coming up next week where the Taoiseach will be going to Brussels, and there will be a meeting of the heads of state, and there is a strong possibility that budget will be decided. And what we're seeing at the moment is there is a shortfall in the payments, particularly in Pillar 1, and that is very concerning, as you know, when beef farmers cannot sustain a living at the moment. One thing that the Minister has to ensure, and it's going to be critical, and I just want to send a very strong message back to the Minister, that they have to ensure that there will be no cut. We're actually, you know, if you look in real terms and real money, it's an increase we need to sustain beef and suckler farmers.
But can I just say, Tim, even before the COVID crisis, the budget was really coming under pressure, I think, from defence and migration and other demands, and now we have the whole recovery plan from COVID. Are you confident that the Minister and the Taoiseach will be able to hammer home that deal and protect the share for agriculture? Well,
I suppose if we go back to February, and again, it was the last time where there was a serious discussion around the budget, around the cap budget and the MFF and you know, the share that will be in the cap budget, and there was a proposal on the table at that time to cut that by 59 million, you know, and we put a campaign in around that, and that didn't happen. So, and all that has happened since, you know, and we're talking in Brussels at the moment, or within the EU, there's a fund now of 1.5 trillion, you know, numbers that we never even heard of before, and there's a recovery fund of 750 million, and part of that will be in Pillar 2 as well. But I have a concern there, if it's in there in the short term, you know, will it continue? So look, there's a lot of concerns around the budget, but I think we have to look at the marketplace as well. Like, there's two areas where beef farmers derive their income from. One obviously is direct payments, and you know, it's my job and IFA's job to ensure that we push that and drive that as hard as we can to ensure farmers are sustainable. But the other side of it is the marketplace, and in the programme for government, there is a plan there to put an ombudsman in place, and that is on the back of legislation that's coming through from Europe. But it's fine doing all these things. That person needs to have powers, real powers, have to have teeth to look at the chain, you know, and look at every actor in the chain. And the primary producer in the chain is the one that's suffering here all the time. So all of those issues have to be addressed, and you know, we have to do this, and we have to ensure that we maintain a viable beef industry going forward. You know, it has been said here already, you know, if we take suckler farmers and beef farmers out of rural Ireland, particularly in the west of Ireland and other parts of the country, you know, disadvantaged areas, like, there'll be a huge void left there, and the option we have, do we want to maintain people farming, or else leave the country, go back into land will actually return to wilding again, and that is not what we want, and that is not our policy.
Thanks, Tim. So I think what we'll do now is we'll hear from another farmer. So we're going to go now to John Keogh in County Carlow, and we'll hear from John.
My name's John Keogh. I'm here on the family farm. I'm the 6th generation in Rathvilly, County Carlow. I farm along with my father, my wife and 4 young children. You know, the European Commission, if they want food and if they want young farmers, we've never had as few young farmers in Ireland today in our history. And if we want young farmers, we give them an income. That's where you'll have more farmers under 35 years of age, and it's based on a lift in commodity prices through the Common Agricultural Policy, which was brought out to subsidise us for cheap food production, if we don't get a lift in our commodity prices, we have to get increased subsidisation, and particularly for the farmers that are producing the prime quality beef, the suckler cow farmers. The thing that I find disappointing is that, you know, we're the 5th largest beef exporter in the world. Our carbon efficiency in terms of beef production is super in that context, but we're competing against beef from countries with a much higher carbon efficiency than I. So like, let's level the playing field, and let's be honest, because we need an honest discussion on this. What you see here today is beef production in a family-run farm which has super environmental standards attached to it. All we need to do is be paid for it. And when we're comparing ourselves to the equivalents, whether it be beef from the US or South American countries, realise that in terms of carbon efficiency, you won't beat Ireland.
A really passionate contribution there from John Keogh, and thanks for that contribution, John. In particular, the point about levelling the playing field, this concept that we produce food to a really high environmental standard here in Europe, but yet we allow imports in from countries that are possibly producing to lower standards and selling at a lower price. This was a point I put to Mairead McGuinness when I spoke to her earlier. We spoke specifically about this concept of the level playing field, and we'll hear from Mairead now.
Well, I think that this is always a big issue, particularly around the Mercosur deal. And there's a lot of objections to that trade agreement, and it still has to be ratified. And it may not get over that hurdle, because there is something illogical about insisting on high standards for production within the European Union, yet doing a deal with countries where the standards are different. And we're not able to impose many of our standards, yet we rather bring in the product. There's also wider issues about soya, for example, and that's a big debating point here in the Parliament, where a lot of our livestock production in Europe, happens through imports of soya. That soya sometimes is genetically modified, but a lot of the time can come from deforested land. So I think that, the farmers in Ireland are right to be concerned about this, if you like, conflict or contradiction between the demands internally and those externally. Now, we are fighting with the Trade Commissioner, who is Commissioner Phil Hogan, to, if you like, match his words with actions, so that we shouldn't allow beef or other meats into the European Union unless they meet the very high standards. But I think equally we have to accept that there are parts of our supply chains, our food supply chains, that rely on, if you like, inputs from outside the European Union that may not be sustainable. So I think that it's not as simple as it sounds. When it comes to beef farming in particular, we know that many farmers rely on the single farm payment, and indeed without it would have very little or no income. And therefore there's an issue about whether there will be a next generation of beef farmers. My own view about beef is that it should be and is a high quality, high priced product, because if you look at the way it's produced over time. You can't rush it. So, I mean, there's standards there. But I think the real problem is, how do we give a decent income to beef farmers, particularly when they're comparing themselves with dairy farming? And I think that that has been quite a sore issue between farmers, because, naturally you're watching what the guy over the hedge is making. But on the other hand, it's also true to say that we have the suckler herd today, which is a very valuable asset, if you like, but we only have that because in the past we had coupled payments for cows. Now that's changed. And indeed, some suckler farmers would have lost money through convergence. So there's been a huge amount of pressure on livestock farming in Ireland, and a huge amount of uncertainty. Last issue, and it's really, really something that I feel very strongly about, the relationship between beef farmers and beef processors is appalling. It was never very good, but I'm a long time following this, and I really would appeal to beef processors not to ignore what farmers are saying and to dismiss their concerns around price fixing effectively, even though the competition authorities say they find no evidence. You cannot sustain an industry where the production side and the processing side don't even sit in a room together and have no relationship. Compare that with the dairy sector, where farmers and processors will sometimes have issues, but they are on the same side of the fence. They know where they're going, they work together. If you have a beef farmer working without cooperation from the processor, that's a road to nowhere, and I hope that will change.
Thanks, Mairead. Loads of issues you've highlighted there right across the supply chain, and maybe in reverse order in looking at that issue about price sharing across the supply chain. And I know you've done a lot of work on this in the Parliament, and we have the Unfair Trading Practices about to be introduced directive in Ireland. Do you think it's going to change? What needs to happen to make that change?
Well, first of all, to get that legislation over the line caused a lot of grief because a lot of the parliamentarians here didn't understand what I was trying to do. So I spent a lot of time explaining that if you want a sustainable supply chain, if you want biodiversity and all of these public goods, you have to make sure that the farmer is receiving an adequate price and that practices along the chain are fair and not disproportionate and causing pressure at producer level. So it's a big step. It will not work on its own without an ombudsman that looks at the food supply chain. And I had written to the previous minister about appointing somebody in this role, a bit like what the UK have, so that if a farmer has a complaint or even a shop, a retail has a complaint, they can go and have somebody assess it. So I think it is an important step change. And it does require retailers and others to be conscious of the fact that you cannot just impose your price and your terms on a producer. It has to be fair and it has to be above board, and you will be held to account. But look, I think much more is needed in the longer term because we're having a lot of conversations about sustainability, biodiversity, farm to fork strategies, CAP reform. I mean, we're being snowed under with new ideas and new demands. And the truth is, unless farmers make a decent income, it is impossible for them to do all the big asks, to look after the environment, to look after themselves, you know, animal welfare, all of these things, because they are put under pressure by low prices. And they're also put under pressure mentally. And I often think when we're talking about farming and yields and production, etc., we forget that the human factor in agriculture is something that can be very vulnerable. And I think in beef farming at the moment, a lot of farmers, and I know from talking to farmers' wives, that they feel under pressure and that they know that they're not making a decent income, but they find it very hard to know where to turn.
And you mentioned there, Marie, the farm to fork strategy, and that was something I really wanted to explore with you. You know, this ambition to become carbon neutral by 2050, it has been presented by the Agricultural Commissioner as a great opportunity for farmers, but I think a lot of them might think of it as a threat. Do you think there's opportunities there in the Green Deal and the farm to fork strategy?
Well, look, it's a reality that everybody is signing up to climate neutrality by 2050. I've just come from a meeting working on the climate law because I'm one of the negotiators. The truth for agriculture, and agriculture in Ireland in particular, is that to achieve a target of 50 to 55%, which may be the case by 2030, could require unprecedented change, and I don't think that will be sustainable. But we know that from now to 2050 that there will be changes. And we know from the EPA's report of this week that the agriculture sector in Ireland is vast. It's very significant. At European level, you know, the figures 10% agriculture, and then livestock within that is quite a significant proportion. What I think about the farm to fork is twofold. One is that it presents huge opportunities for Irish agriculture if we get all our environmental and climate credentials right, because some of them are not right, and we have to acknowledge that, and we have to change. And that's why CAP reform will, if you like, assist in that process. So it's important that we do that. I think the challenge is, and the fear is, that because of the, if you like, the ambition around emissions targets, that there will be an effort to reduce the size of the herd. And that's very emotive and emotional for farmers. And my view on that is that, first of all, farmers need to look at their own situation, their own backyard, and see, are they making money from the way they're producing now? Could they look at these new ideas about carbon farming? I know they're not in place now, but it could come. Could they look at linking in, when CAP reform is done, to more eco schemes around hedgerows and biodiversity? Rewetting peatlands is very, you know, it's a contentious issue, but the truth is, if we rewet peatlands, you can store enormous amounts of carbon. So I think what we have to be open to is not just doing what we've always done for the last few decades, but thinking about the changes that we might have to make in line with public policy, which might also benefit us. But I do think the key point for Ireland, as a huge exporter of food, is to prove that we are both local and international. There's a lot of talk about local food markets, and yet for Irish farmers, the local has to be European and international. And we have to be able to prove, not just to say that we do all the right things around air quality, water quality, emissions. You know, and the dairy sector, we would be challenged on some of those things around animal welfare, around live exports. So it's not an easy time in terms of the farmer trying to work backwards at a policy level. But I can say from my own side here, it's a very difficult time here too, trying to make legislation that is coherent and trying to make it in a way that doesn't impact negatively on our rural regions, which depend on agriculture, but being sensitive to that big picture of climate change, because overall that is the big factor around every single policy, whether it's energy or tourism or agriculture.
And I suppose, Mairead, in Ireland, when we talk about emissions targets, we'll quickly get into a debate of one farm sector against the other. Can the dairy sector grow and can the beef sector still prosper? In your view, is there a version of the future where we can have a viable suckler cow herd as well as an expanding dairy herd?
Well, I think we have a very strong suckler cow herd, but I would always make the point that just because we have it now doesn't mean it should remain the same. I mean, the origins of our suckler herd at its current size was due to coupled payments on the suckler cow. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the numbers we have today. I think what has happened in Ireland because of dairy expansion, we have an overall increase in numbers, and clearly that has an impact on emissions. And that leads to this farmer versus farmer controversy. But actually, I think we have more battles to do together rather than between each other. But I do say to the dairy farmers that, you know, when it comes to what you're producing, people look at milk only, but the truth is it's milk, it's a calf, it's emissions, and it's slurry. So that in all of the ways we work, the way we produce and consume, and beef farmers will have to do the same, is look entirely at the chain, your inputs, whether it's veterinary medicines or fertilizer, or whatever it is that you're inputting into your livestock, and at the entirety of that to see whether it is sustainable. So I do think there's a future for the suckler herd, for quality beef, but I think that the market has to reward it. Payments have been held. You know, we're under pressure here. We're still going through a big debate about the next budget for the European Union. The German Chancellor was with us yesterday, talking about her vision for recovery and for the next budget. Our concern, and I'll be very blunt about this, is that the recovery is going to happen and it will be big. But I hope that the payoff isn't a lower budget for the next 7 years, because that could impact negatively on agriculture. But I think politically here in the Parliament, we're wise to that possibility and we are resisting it. So I would hope that we can maintain payments, but there will be changes as to who gets the money, not just through convergence, but also through eco schemes and rural development programs. And I suppose in a way we have created an agriculture today based on past policy of pushing production. I mean, I recall this from my days as a reporter. We pushed output and used inputs and we made fields bigger. And then we've learned that actually nature needs a little bit more care and is a bit more delicate than just ripping everything out. And we're now encouraging farmers to regrow hedgerows, to leave margins on fields, that you don't have to plough to the very edge. And indeed be careful of where you spread either sprays or indeed fertilizers. We're talking about a big increase in organic farming. So it's a time of great change, but I think to your point, you know, sometimes change can be exciting. And rather than us retreating into the way we are and we will not change, there's a lot of very young farmers very keen to change. There's a lot of women in agriculture changing already. And I think that that's what we need to look at. Where are our chances and our opportunities? And be broad-minded about it. I mentioned carbon farming because there are industries that would like to link up with farmers who have a lot of carbon stored in their soil to be able to trade. So it may be in the future, farmers will not just be selling a product, but they will be selling public goods, and they'll also be selling a value of carbon that's held in their soils. So I think it's an exciting time, but it's not without its concerns. I mean, and I can understand the anxieties at farm level.
Thanks to Mairead McGuinness, MEP, for that really thought-provoking contribution. And I want to explore now with the panellists here in studio, especially around the farm-to-fork strategy and whether this can be an opportunity for farmers in Ireland. Jerry, this target to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, do you think that that can be an opportunity for farmers? Mairead said there, and I noted her quote, in the future farmers will not be just selling food, but they'll be selling the value of carbon that's stored in their soils. Do you see this as a threat or an opportunity for farmers?
Well, look, I always tend to be optimistic about these matters. First point is it's a huge, huge challenge, because when we talk about carbon neutrality, we're not just talking about the beef sector. Of course, we have to look at the entire livestock sector. And most beef farms are, in fact, when it comes to their environment, they have a very low carbon footprint. The typical beef farm produces much less emissions than the typical dairy farm. I mean, they're pretty extensive businesses. So to achieve neutrality, what you've got to do on the one hand is mitigate the production of emissions. And Mairead made the point there, which is very true. I mean, that is not costless to the farmer. I mean, Teagasc has identified a menu of actions for dairy and beef farmers, which will mitigate emissions, but they will cost. And if that cost is needed to produce public goods, well, obviously there has to be some compensation from the European public purse, so to speak. So that's one side. The opportunity that everyone talks about, and it's undoubtedly there, is in relation to the sequestration of carbon. And I know the President of IFA has talked about this on a number of occasions. Indeed, we've discussed it at some length. Yes, there are opportunities, but they're very much down the road. I mean, when we talk about the benign impact that the growing of hedgerows will have on the sequestration of carbon, for instance, and particularly when we look at the potential of our grasslands to sequester carbon, before a market emerges where a farmer can convert this into cash, a lot of groundwork has to be done. And in my opinion, you're talking at least 10 years before we would see the emergence of a potential market. So there is opportunity, but let's be realistic here. For example, Teagasc have identified a so-called Signpost Farms initiative, which is about creating a network of farms around the country to examine mitigation options. But crucially, we're going to look at the potential that the typical farm has to sequester carbon, particularly in grasslands. And what farmers will need if they're to cash in ultimately, and that's the aim, is to have verifiable quantification of the carbon that they have sequestered. And that's going to take a lot of research, it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to require a lot of infrastructural support. So I would say, yes, there are opportunities, but we need to be very realistic that if we want people to produce all of these public goods, we've got to get the incentive system right. And that's the critical issue as far as I can see.
And how well equipped is the Farm Advisory Service in Teagasc to roll out those mitigation technologies and push that out on farms and raise awareness and knowledge and everything that needs to happen to get to that place?
But no different to farmers. I mean, we have to gear up for that. And clearly we've already, in the last couple of years or so, we have already launched an intensive retraining program in relation to the full gamut of sustainability. And by the way, I come back to the central point about sustainability, which I know Thea, you have emphasized in your own research work when you used to work in Teagasc. So the critical sustainability element is, of course, farm income. So we have geared up our advisory service, but we have to go beyond that. We have to look at all of the rural professions, including the private consultants out there, agribusiness, the co-ops, the meat companies. We all have to work together, along with farmers, to encourage them to make the kind of necessary sea change that they're going to have to make, which is difficult not only for farmers, but all of us. I mean, as consumers, as taxpayers, we are challenged to change our whole attitude and way of life in relation to the whole carbon issue. Farmers are no different, and our advisory service and our research service are going to play critical roles in identifying those carbon-saving opportunities that undoubtedly are there.
Great. And Tim, how does the notion of carbon neutrality and, to quote Mairead again, selling public goods will be as valuable as selling beef, how does that notion sit with your members, do you think?
Look, the first thing here, TA, is farmers have to have an income. Like, the first thing we have to say, top line for me always is it's about an income. And you know, if an income comes from selling carbon, that's fine. I'm delighted to hear Jerry here this evening saying that, you know, Teagasc is going to invest the resources and the time into assessing what amount of carbon is being sequestered in farmland. Like Mairead is talking there about keeping out from the hedgerows and all the rest of it. But like, we have no measure, or we have no allowance for the hedgerows in Ireland as we speak. I mean, we have hedgerows that would actually, there's enough hedgerows in Ireland that would cover County Tipperary. Now that's a lot of hedgerows, and Tipperary is a good county, or a big county as well. But you know, this is where we need to get to. It's fine to be talking about doing all of this, but we need to see the action now. And as I say, farmers don't mind. If farmers are doing a public good, they have to be paid for it. Like if we take, for example, the disadvantaged areas and the west of Ireland. So if we want to keep farmers farming in those areas, and the only way we can do that, the only way it's going to be sustainable farming, is by keeping suckler cows and keeping sheep in those areas. And we have to come up with a scheme. There has to be a measurement. As I say, if they're doing a public good, they're going to have to be paid, and paid properly to do that. And it's a major job of work, you know, for Teagasc and for everybody to get in behind this and you know, get that programme up and running. But I want to go back as well to John Keogh there. Like, if you ever seen a passionate farmer, you know, that is passionate about sucklers, and you know, here we are again. We're seeing two prime examples here this evening, where people are working morning, noon and night, and they can't deliver an income to rear their farms. You know, and we have to keep coming back to this. And you know, as I say, it's fine for Mairead to be talking about, you know, keeping out from the hedgerows, but until we're going to get a payment for this, you know, we're going nowhere. And you know, my view here is that we have to continue on this journey. There has to be a proper carbon payment, you know, if this can be assessed. And to keep that suckler cow, we already, you know, with all the campaigns that we have been running, we have a payment now somewhere in the region of up to 180 euros per suckler cow. You know, we have a target to get to 300 euros, and you know, we're going to continue on that journey. And we also want to get a decent payment for a ewe, to get that ewe up to 30 euros, because if we take them out of rural Ireland, you know, it's going to be decimated.
And I'm glad you've mentioned the future of the suckler cow and the farmer in the west of Ireland, because we've one more video clip to play, and that's from Nigel O'Kane, who's a suckler farmer in County Galway, and we'll hear now from Nigel.
My name is Nigel O'Kane. I'm from Galway in west of Ireland. I'm a part-time suckler farmer. We sell our stock here, so I'm weighing into a store producer. We have about 40 suckler cows here on about 85 acres. I'm full-time employment as a plumber as well. I suppose I'd like to see the Irish government supporting our suckler herd, really, because we need good suckler support schemes. I mean, the BDGP is going to finish this year. I know of a lot of farmers around this area in particular who are only waiting for it to finish to get out of sucklers. And if there's nothing else coming behind that, or nothing that's viable coming behind that, then we're going to see a decimation of our suckler herd in the west of Ireland and all over Ireland. Another thing that needs to be probably backed by the EU is our live exports. We need a clear passage from Ireland to Europe to keep the cattle flowing from one country to the next. Because if we don't have that, then when it comes to marts, we'll have no one buying. We'll have no competition, and we'll be at the mercy of the factories, and they can dictate to whatever price we have to take, and we'll have no way of controlling that. I suppose profitability has been a major issue over beef farms over the last 5 to 10 years. We've seen our profitability drop, and the more efficient we become, the less money we're getting. Now, they're bringing in these carbon efficient schemes. They want us to do low emission slurry. They're asking us to put out protected urea. Majority of farmers are okay with that. We want to protect our environment. We want to do what's best for our country.
I suppose where I would like to see Teagasc going forward is to put, you know, a bit more emphasis on the environment, but also a lot more emphasis on the profitability of the farming systems. How do we get them up? How do we improve farm efficiency? But most importantly, more than any of that, is to improve farm profitability. I see too many farmers that are not being able to generate a second income for the young and the next generation to come on. And that's the challenge I would put to Teagasc and to the beef industry in general.
Thanks to Nigel and John again there for those contributions, and I'm delighted that questions have started coming in from our viewers at home. The first question follows on very well from Nigel's clip actually, and it's from Aidan in County Meath, and I might put this question to you, Tim. CAP reform will only make more hurdles for farmers. Standards keep increasing and prices keep dropping. When will beef prices take into account the environmental standards and all the other stuff like animal welfare that Irish beef brings?
Yeah, I have to agree with that. So the more schemes, the more hurdles farmers have to hurdle, and we have to look at that. And I suppose when will it take into account on a price of beef? I think that has been a major concern for a long time now, and we have been running numerous campaigns around that. And I think, I suppose, a couple of measures. We speak here about an ombudsman, but we need competition. And I think it was Nigel pointed out there, we need live exports. We need two channels of moving beef here in this country. We have to slaughter almost 40,000 cattle a week. What happens here is when we go over 30,000 cattle a week, it creates a problem in the marketplace. So we have to have a proper live export trade. And I think, to be able to sell the excellent wings we've seen there that Nigel has in the west of Ireland, we need a route to market for them. So it is critical that this government does everything in their power to ensure we have live exports. I suppose the other side of that is obviously keeping live exports going, but again we have to go back to the supply chain and all the actors in the chain. And what we're seeing here is the farmer is at the end of the chain getting the least amount out of that chain. And this has been going on now for a long number of years. And until we get legislation around that, and I think EU governments have to wake up. I know we have a cheap food policy, but what has happened is the payments the farmers are getting from CAP is going this way. The price they're getting is going the same direction. And until there's a wake-up call here that we cannot continue to produce cheap, good quality food, we have to be paid for it. And if there was ever an example of that was during the recent COVID, when every other industry in the country was closed down. Here we were as farmers producing top quality food day in, day out, and what happened? Farmers weren't paid for it again. So look, it's up to every actor in the chain here. I think the processors need to wake up in this country and realise farmers are not going to continue doing what they're doing. We've heard several people here on the pops tonight. They're not going to continue doing it. I met a group of farmers this evening that said they will not put cattle in the shed next winter. So what I'm clearly saying here to the entire industry tonight, to the processors, the secondary processors and the retailer, there's a wake-up call here. If they want to be able to get prime Irish beef, and if Bord Bia wants to be able to sell Irish beef all over the world, well then everybody needs to wake up or we will not have an industry.
Thanks, Tim. And we can't say many positive things about COVID, but I think one of the things we can say is that consumers understand what food security means now, probably for the first time ever, and there might be something positive coming out of that. I want to go to another question that came in from a viewer at home. There's no name on this one, and Jerry, I might put it to you. The viewer says they feel that not enough is being done about health and safety on farms, and I know we sadly had some farm deaths again this week, that there isn't enough auditing of machinery, precautions around slurry and livestock. What is the health and safety agenda within Teagasc?
Well, health and safety is a huge part of our mission, particularly in the advisory service. And we have a very extensive programme in place. We have 2 specialists leading the programme, and then every advisor is trained up in relation to health and safety on farms. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a huge concern for all of us. I mean, there is no family in Ireland that hasn't been affected by fatalities and serious injuries on farms. So, I mean, it tends to be affected as well by the general level of economic activity. For example, in recent years, it's been very disturbing that more elderly farmers seem to be more susceptible to serious accidents on farms because the younger members of the household may be out working. So you have, unfortunately, farmers that are far too elderly driving very heavy machinery, and that's a source of concern. I'm glad to see that the numbers, for example, of younger people, in particular children, that has declined in recent years. So we work very closely obviously with the Health and Safety Authority and with the farm organisations, with the likes of FBD and other insurance companies. But it is a huge, huge challenge, and I guess it's part of the changing nature of the farming landscape. It's become a more lonely activity, and that's really the concern has to be one of ever vigilance in relation to health and safety.
And when you mention that concept of loneliness and isolation, something I remember from Sean's contribution earlier when he talked about the discussion group, not only was it about what he learned at it, it was the chance to go out and meet other farmers. How successful has the discussion group programme been in beef farming in particular?
Well, look, as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the greatest innovations in the advisory service in the last 25 years. Has been the discussion group. For the reasons you say, I mean, farmers learn better from each other. Farming is a complex business, getting ever more complex in relation to the regulatory environment and the whole sustainability agenda and so on. And the role of the advisor now, the good advisor is a facilitator. He brings the best out of a group. And Theo, you have done your own work, I know, in relation to dairy, and you prove conclusively that there's a net benefit in income terms that farmers derive from being members of a discussion group. And during COVID, actually, thanks to our colleagues in PR and the advisory service, we changed overnight to a virtual delivery of discussion groups. And I had the privilege of sitting in on a number of those, and I learned so much about how farmers in those groups essentially come to a common cause in relation to their challenges on their farms. And some of those aren't always technical or market indeed. I mean, a lot can derive from the challenges of social isolation during the COVID lockdown and so on. So look, I'm a tremendous champion. And again, there was one of the videos earlier, a farmer referred to the knowledge transfer scheme. And that is concluded now, but it ran over a period of 3 years and encouraged new people to join discussion groups that wouldn't have joined previously. And since that scheme has concluded, what's very gratifying to see is so many farmers who up to the introduction of the scheme wouldn't have participated in discussion groups are staying on in discussion groups. So there is a very real benefit.
Great. I didn't just ask you about discussion groups now so you could quote my own research, wasn't it?
No, but I mean,
promotion tactic.
I'm glad to do so.
Tim, we've 2 more questions I might put to you that are specifically around schemes, and it's nearly time to wrap up. So just 2 specific questions that came in from viewers. The first is from Francie in County Laois, and he's asking what can be done for farmers, and it's a point Mairead made as well actually, that have lost out due to convergence and due to the flattening of payments in previous CAP reforms, and whether there's something on the agenda for those farmers. And then we also have a question from Martin in County Louth, and it is to say that the COVID support that's proposed is great for finishers, but what about the suckler farmers? I don't know if you have comments on those 2 questions.
I suppose the first one on farmers that has lost out on convergence. Look, I have a very clear view on convergence. You know, farmers that have worked throughout their lives to build up an entitlement, you know, I think they're entitled to that payment. But what we need to do for the farm, particularly on the beef side, on the lower income farms, we have to work on what I was saying already, you know, on an environmental scheme to bring those farmers up again. And we need new money for this. So if farmers are doing a public good, well then they have to get paid for it. And I suppose on the suckler one, there's 8,000 farmers, beef farmers that are drawing the COVID. We negotiated the COVID €350 payment for farmers at the onset of COVID. And there is already a payment between the BDGP and the beef scheme. There's almost €180, you know, available for suckler cows at the moment. I suppose what I have to say, I think it's critical that the payment at the moment, the 50 million, will go to beef finishers. So, because we need these people back in the ring next October buying the stores again. Look, I've spoken to several farmers that this is the last straw of the dice for them. If they cannot get a decent price for their cattle, they're just not going to do it. So look, I think it is justified, this current payment, that it has to go to the beef finishers. You know, we are working on an increased payment for suckler farmers. So we are going to continue that campaign until we get that up to €300. So, and I know more than anyone that without a proper payment with a suckler cow, she will not survive. You know, and we said it earlier, if we want to keep farmers farming in rural Ireland, well then there has to be a decent payment for them.
Thanks, Tim. So now we're almost out of time. So at this point, I'd just like to thank our panellists. Thanks to Tim Cullinan from the IFA, Professor Jerry Boyle, Director of Teagasc, I want to thank Minister Cowan and MEP Mairead McGuinness for taking time earlier to do an interview with me. Thanks all of you for joining us this evening and for sending in your questions and making it an interactive session, and to our sponsors FBD. So I'm going to give the final word of the week to Professor Gerry Boyle. Over to you, Gerry.
Thanks, Tia. And as Tia said, we've now reached the end of this unique event, Virtual Beef Week. And I just want to make a few thank yous for everyone involved in what has been a huge task and involved a huge theme of really enthusiastic people. I would like to thank again, of course, our sponsors, FBD Trust. I'd like to thank all of my own colleagues, our researchers, our advisors, our specialists, our administrators, our farm staff, of course, our technologists and technicians. I would like to also mention our media partners, the Irish Farmers Journal and AgriLand. I would like to thank in particular all of the farmers who participated in the videos and in the panel discussions. And finally, I do want to give a special word of thanks to what I'm calling Teagasc's Fellini, our own Declan McArdle, and of course our colleagues in PR, who I know performed a Herculean task over the last week. And remember, you can get all of these videos online. They'll be there forever and a day, and I would encourage you and your fellow farmers, if you get a chance, to study them over the next few months. Good night.